Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. Recipe 1. Homemade blueberry muffins with lemon zest. I'll tell you of when I worked at a seaside cafe in London. There was a head baker named Megs. She was tough, kind, and always smelled of flour and orange pekoe tea. Her apron was never clean, and her hands were forever dusted in white, like she'd just clapped the snow off her gloves. Megs believed in early mornings, handwritten recipes, and blueberry muffins that tasted like waking up to the smell of salt air and warm sunshine. She used to say, a proper muffin should taste like morning, not dessert. And with that, she'd crack eggs into a bowl with the kind of grace that comes from making something 1,000 times without ever once hurrying. What set her muffins apart, what made them linger in your memory long after the last bite, were 2 things: frozen wild blueberries and lemon zest from a grater, so warm it curved like a smile. I can still picture the prep table by the back window. The breeze would sneak in through a crack in the frame, carrying sea mist and the faint cry of gulls. Megs would start by whisking together the dry ingredients: flour, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and just enough sugar to round it all out without tipping into sweetness. Balance, she'd murmur, measuring with her palm instead of the scale, like the tide in and out. Then came the lemon, not just the zest, but the ritual of zesting. She'd roll the fruit first on the counter, coaxing the oils to the surface. Then she'd drag it gently across the grater, letting the peel fall in soft yellow curls that smelled of sunlight. That scent filled the whole cafe kitchen, blending with the butter she'd melted and set aside to cool golden and rich. In another bowl, she'd mix the wet ingredients: a couple of eggs, beaten until just frothy, a splash of vanilla, not too much, and then milk, sometimes buttermilk if the morning felt especially foggy, because tang stands up to berries, she'd say. Then came the melted butter, folded in slowly so it wouldn't cook the eggs. All of it combined gently with the dry mix, never overmixed. Don't bully the batter, she'd joke. Let it stay soft. The blueberries were always added last, wild ones, tiny and bursting, still frozen. She said it kept them from bleeding into the batter, helped them hold their shape. You want little pockets of surprise, she told me once. Not a blue smear pretending to be a muffin. She'd toss them first with a spoonful of flour so they wouldn't sink, then fold them in with barely 2 turns of the spoon. The batter, thick and speckled with purple and gold, was scooped into paper-lined tins with a practiced flick of her wrist. There was a hush just before baking, a reverence almost. She'd sprinkle a bit of raw sugar on top for crunch, then slide the trays into the oven, the scent already teasing its way into the air. The cafe would still be quiet then, not yet open, and we'd sit with our mugs and wait for the scent to bloom. First, the butter, then the berry, then that whisper of lemon, subtle, but there, like a thread of sunlight slipping through a curtain. When the tops cracked open just slightly and turned the color of pale gold, she'd pull them out and rest them on the windsill. Not for cooling, though they did, but because she said muffins liked a view. They'll taste better if they've seen the sea. Sometimes she'd split one open for us while it was still warm, steam rising like a sigh from the center. The blueberries would have softened just enough to stain the crumb, and the lemon would cut through with a brightness that made your tongue smile. No butter, no jam, just the muffin, honest and soft, crumbling in your hand. I've made those muffins hundreds of times since, in city apartments, quiet cabins, borrowed kitchens, but I always do it her way, with frozen wild berries, lemon zest scraped by hand, and enough stillness in the air to let the batter rest. I line the tin. I scoop the batter. I scatter the sugar crystals like I'm salting the tide. And I wait, not impatiently but with the same gentle expectation as dawn. They never quite taste the same without the sea breeze, or Meg's humming under her breath, but the memory of them carries through. It carries in the scent that fills the house, in the way the tops rise just enough to split, in that first bite, still warm, still kind. And perhaps tonight, before you close your eyes, you can imagine that kitchen too. The quiet clink of the spoon, the hum of the oven, the smell of lemon and berries curling into the corners, maybe in the quiet just before sleep. There's still a little room left for morning. Rest now. Let the oven cool, and the flour settle. Let the muffins rise in your dreams, soft, sweet, and touched with light. That was recipe 1. Recipe 3, 1 pan cheesy baked eggs with spinach and tomato. This was our Sunday ritual dish in the staff kitchen. 5 ingredients, 1 pan, and always, without fail, a soft humming in the background. The same French lullaby every week. None of us ever asked our sous chef where he learned it, but it always filled the kitchen like steam on a cold window. Warm, familiar, slightly off key, just like the dish. The ritual began early, before the city had fully woken, and long before the lunch rush would call us to battle. Sunday mornings in that kitchen were sacred. The clatter of pans softened, voices dropped to murmurs. It was the only time we cooked for ourselves, not guests, and we always made the same thing: cheesy baked eggs, tucked into a bed of tomatoes and wilted spinach, with melted edges and yolks, just shy of runny. He'd start with a splash of olive oil in the skillet. Nothing fancy, just enough to gloss the bottom. The pan was well loved, its handle slightly loose, its surface seasoned from years of faithful service. It lived on the back burner all week, waiting for Sunday. Next came the tomatoes, halved cherry ones, mostly, though sometimes plum, or even diced fresh ones, if someone had brought extras from home. They went into the hot oil with a gentle sizzle, their skins blistering just slightly, their juices beginning to weep into the pan. He'd stir them slowly, never rushed, as if coaxing out secrets. Then he'd add a couple of handfuls of fresh spinach, washed and still slightly wet, and let it wilt down into the tomatoes. The leaves would darken and fold in on themselves, melting into the red like a green tide pulling back at dusk. The fragrance that filled the room, earthy, sweet, faintly tangy, was always the first sign that breakfast was on its way. That's when the humming would begin, a slow, sleepy tune à la Clairefontaine, he told me once. Something his mother sang when he was little, brushing his hair back before bed. He said it sounded better in a kitchen than in a crib, and we never disagreed. Once the spinach had softened, he'd clear little wells in the mixture with the back of a spoon, 4 or 5 divots, like little craters, and crack an egg into each one. One smooth movement per egg, no shells, no mess. Just gentle drops into place. Then came the cheese. Always something melty, never fancy. Some weeks it was shredded mozzarella, others a crumbled chèvre, or even a few torn slices of mild cheddar. It depended on what was left in the walk-in fridge, but it was always enough to lace the eggs with richness and pull the whole thing together like a worn, comforting blanket. He'd sprinkle a touch of salt, a whisper of pepper, and then slide the entire pan into the oven already hot, already waiting. The door would shut with a creak, and we'd wait, 10 minutes, maybe 12, long enough to mop the counters or sip burnt coffee. He never used a timer, just his nose, his ears, and that sixth sense all good cooks develop over time. When the whites were just set and the yolks still jiggled like sleepy eyes behind closed lids. He'd pull it from the oven with thick towels and a proud smile. He served it right from the pan, placing it on the center table like a small ceremony. We'd tear off hunks of crusty bread, brought in from the bakery down the street, and scoop up spoonfuls of molten tomato, tender spinach, and gooey egg. It was never fancy, but it was always enough. There was something about the way the cheese browned, just around the edges, forming golden little ruffles, or how the yolk would run a little when pierced with a corner of bread. The spinach gave it earth, the tomato gave it brightness, the egg gave it salt. Some mornings, someone would bring in herbs, basil or thyme, or a pinch of oregano, and scatter them over the top, just before serving. But even without them, the dish never failed to comfort. It filled us before a long day. It softened the sharpness of the knives, the heat of the lunch. It reminded us, even for just a moment, that cooking could still be tender. Years later, I still make it. Not every Sunday, but on quiet mornings when the sky is low and the house feels like it's exhaling. I warm the pan the same way, blister the tomatoes, wilt the spinach. I make those little wells and crack in the eggs, remembering the way he did it. Smooth, unbothered, precise. And yes, I hum the tune. Not perfectly, and probably off-key, but softly, for myself and for the memory of those Sundays when we cooked with no tickets, no timers, no pressure. Just ingredients that understood each other, and a chef who believed that food, real food, should feel like being sung to sleep. So, if you've got a few eggs, a handful of spinach, some tomatoes, a bit of cheese, and a pan that feels like home, make this slowly, quietly, maybe even hum a little. And when it's done, eat it warm, with bread in hand, and no rush at all. Then lie back, let the warmth spread, let the quiet take over. You've eaten well, you've been cared for, and now it's time to rest. That was recipe 3. Recipe 4. Warm apple compote with maple syrup and oats. A forager I met up north once said, "If your apples are tired, put them to bed with maple." He had a way with words like that. Simple, poetic, and always just shy of wisdom. We'd crossed paths one autumn when I was staying in a cabin near Algonquin, writing recipes by hand and trying to remember what food was like before deadlines and service bells. He lived nearby, in a crooked little cottage, with a stovepipe chimney and stacks of old seed catalogues by the door. Every morning, he walked the trails with a basket on one arm and a thermos of black tea in the other, humming to the trees like they might answer back. One misty morning, he came by with a burlap sack of bruised apples, Cortlands, Macs, a few golden russets, the kind of fruit too soft for market, but too honest to waste. He handed them to me with a smile, wiped his hands on his sleeves, and said, "Make something sleepy." So I did. I began by peeling the apples, not all of them, just most. I liked leaving a few strips of skin for color and texture. Then I cut them into chunks, uneven on purpose, because I wanted some to melt into the pot, and others to hold their shape like small sweet stones. The forager always said apples told their story better when they weren't made to look alike. Into a heavy-bottomed saucepan they went, with a knob of butter that melted like sunlight over the fruit. As it began to sizzle and sigh, I added a small splash of water, just enough to stop the apples from catching, and then the maple syrup, not too much, the good kind, amber and thick, poured in a slow ribbon that clung to the spoon. The scent that lifted from the pan was immediate, warm, woody, soft around the edges. As the apples simmered, I stirred them gently and added a pinch of salt, barely enough to notice, but just enough to make everything else taste rounder. Then came a dusting of cinnamon and a whisper of nutmeg, both added with the quiet confidence of someone who's learned that too much spice can crowd the silence out of a dish. I let them cook like that, uncovered, until they softened and slumped in the pot, the juices thickening to a syrupy glaze. Some pieces dissolved entirely, blending into the buttery base, while others stayed intact, like sleepy stars in a night sky. While that was happening, I toasted some oats in a dry pan, slowly over low heat. You'd be surprised what a difference that made. They took on a golden hue, a nutty perfume that filled the room with something that felt both ancient and new. Once they were ready, I stirred in a little more maple and let them cool into clusters, like granola. When the apples were done, I spooned them into a wide ceramic bowl, still warm, the kind with a chip on the rim that I liked to pretend gave it character. Over top went the oats, scattered gently like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. And then just before serving, a final drizzle of maple syrup, slow and ribboned, like a lullaby finding its last note. We ate it sitting by the fire, the forager and I, both of us wrapped in wool and too many memories. He said it reminded him of bedtime when he was a boy. His grandmother used to warm apples with honey and feed them to him with a wooden spoon, one slow bite at a time. This version, he said between spoonfuls, feels like tucking the trees in for the winter. I think about that a lot. How even the humblest food apples past their prime, oats in the cupboard, syrup from the back of the fridge, can become something tender when given time, warmth, and a little attention. There's no need for fancy pastry, no crusts or creams, just apples, gently coaxed into comfort. Sometimes now, on nights when the wind scratches at the window and the world feels a little sharper than it should, I make this again. I don't rush it. I peel slowly, stir with care, let the apples tell their story. And when it's ready, I eat it quietly, letting the warmth soften the corners of the day. So if you've got apples in the bowl, a bottle of maple on the shelf, and a little time to spare before bed, try this. Let the smells fill your kitchen. Let the pot do its work. And when you take that first spoonful, imagine you're tucking in something more than fruit. Perhaps a memory, perhaps yourself. And after that, sleep. Not rushed, not pulled, just allowed. Like apples, resting in maple. That was recipe 4. Classic grilled cheese with a crunchy edge. There was a cook named Larius in my first diner gig. One of those old, narrow counters with swivel stools and a jukebox that only played the left side of every song. I was barely 17, trying to prove I could flip eggs without breaking the yolk. Larius was already in his 50s then. Wiry, with silver hair he kept tucked beneath a well-worn bandana. He didn't say much, but when he did, it usually meant something. He swore the secret to the perfect grilled cheese was pressing it with a cast iron pan and always using day-old bread. Now, Lewis wasn't the type to give out full recipes. No measurements, no precise timing, just observations, sharpened by years of standing over a hot flat top. One rainy afternoon, after the lunch rush had faded and the smell of bacon still lingered in the air, I watched him make it. First came the bread. Not fresh. That was important. Fresh bread, he said, goes too soft, gets lost in the heat, but bread that's had a day to breathe, that holds its dignity. He used sourdough, crusty and pale, just thick enough to take on a good sear, without overwhelming the cheese. He'd set the slices on a floured cutting board and give them a tap, like he was greeting an old friend. Then the butter, real, unsalted, left out long enough to spread without tearing the bread. He covered both slices edge to edge, even the corners. The crunch, he said, starts where you stop forgetting. That's Lewis for you, always, half poet, half pragmatist. For the cheese he was picky, never just one kind. He liked sharp cheddar for depth, a slice of mozzarella for melt, and sometimes a paper-thin shaving of Gruyere, if we had it left from the omelette station. He'd layer them like pages in a book, gently pressing them between the bread, as if sealing something secret inside. Then came the trick, his cast-iron pan, He'd set it on the flat top, or a burner. Medium heat, never more. When it was warm enough to hold your hand above, but not too hot to linger, in went the sandwich. But he didn't just drop it and wait. Louis took a second cast iron, a smaller one, and placed it gently on top of the sandwich like a lid. The weight was perfect, not too heavy, just enough to encourage the bread to crisp and the cheese to melt evenly. And then he'd wait. No flipping every minute, no pressing and fussing. He'd just let it sit, humming softly to himself. Usually something Spanish and slow. After 3 or 4 minutes, he'd lift the top pan and flip the sandwich with care. Not rushed. He knew it was ready by the smell, that nutty golden scent of butter just beginning to caramelize, the cheese beginning to sigh into the bread. Another few minutes on the second side, and that was it. No garnish, no frill, just a sandwich, golden and hot, the edges just a little darker and crispier than the middle. He'd cut it diagonally, always diagonally, and press the blade through slowly, letting the cheese stretch before it gave way. When I made it for the first time, I was too eager. I used soft bread and tore it with cold butter. My cheese was thick and uneven. I flipped too soon. It came out edible, sure, but it didn't sing the way his did. Louis didn't say anything at first, just took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and said, "You're thinking too hard." Let the bread do the work. That stuck with me. Years later, when I'm home late and the day's been loud, I make his grilled cheese. I don't rush it. I let the bread rest out on the counter for a day, even if it means planning ahead. I soften the butter, pick the cheeses like I'm choosing memories, and heat the pan with the patience of someone who knows it's not about getting dinner on the table. It's about letting something ordinary become extraordinary. Sometimes when I really want to honor him, I even hum a tune while it cooks, something wordless and slow, letting the sandwich crisp in peace. When it's done, I cut it slowly, and I eat it warm, usually with one hand holding the plate and the other wiping crumbs from my lap. It tastes like comfort with edges, like something made from almost nothing, and in those moments, I think about how Louis taught me more than just how to cook. He taught me how to wait, how to listen to heat, how to let simplicity be enough. So tonight, if your kitchen is quiet and your heart is a little tired, take 2 slices of bread, a bit of cheese, and trust the pan. Let it press the day down into something golden. And when you take that first bite, remember, it's not just grilled cheese. It's a small, quiet act of care, like a story you tell yourself before sleep. And with that, rest easy. Let the corners of your day crisp and melt, just like the sandwich. All warm, all gentle, all done. That was recipe 5. Recipe 2. Peanut butter and banana toast with a sprinkle of cinnamon. I was broke during my first year of culinary school. Not just a little short on money. I mean counting coins at the bus stop, stretching meals over days, hoping the cafeteria had something cheap but hot. My knives were second-hand, my apron always stained, and I slept on a mattress that had more lumps than the mashed potatoes I was trying to master. Still, I was exactly where I wanted to be, learning, watching, tasting, failing. In the student kitchen, there was a line cook named Kofi. He'd grown up in Ghana and somehow ended up working the evening shift in the teaching restaurant attached to our school. He wasn't loud, didn't show off, didn't bark orders like some of the instructors, but he moved like water, quiet, certain, graceful. Every chop was even, every pan handled like it mattered. I admired him the way a candle admires the sun. One night after service, I was too tired to go home and too hungry to pretend I wasn't. I sat at the staff table, staring at a crust of bread and a few smuggled packets of peanut butter, when Kofi came over. He looked at the little pile in front of me, then back at me, and said, "You're trying too hard to survive. Let me show you how to turn that into something that loves you back." He walked over to the pantry and came back with a ripe banana, 2 slices of day-old sourdough, and a little jar of cinnamon he kept tucked in his coat pocket. Always carry your flavors with you, he said. They remind you who you are. He took out a skillet. No toaster, just a pan with some weight to it, and began warming it over low heat. Dry toast, he explained. The crunch will come from the heat, not the oil. While the pan warmed, he peeled the banana and sliced it in long, even pieces. Not too thin, not too thick. You want it to soften, not disappear. Then came the bread. He set the slices down gently, pressing them just a little so they made good contact with the pan. The room began to smell like warmth itself. Not sweet, not savory, just warm. After a couple of minutes, he flipped them. The undersides were golden, just edging toward crisp. He scooped out the peanut butter, smooth, not crunchy, and spread it while the toast was still hot, so it melted just slightly, sliding into the cracks of the bread. You don't need butter if the peanut butter is real, he said. Fat is comfort, but texture is memory. Then he layered the banana slices on top, overlapping slightly, like scales on a fish, and dusted the whole thing with cinnamon, holding the jar high above so it fell like a whisper. That's it, he said. You eat this, and you'll feel like someone's holding your shoulders. I didn't believe him until I took that first bite. The crunch of the toast, still warm from the pan, the peanut butter, creamy and rich, hugging the banana's sweetness like it had always been meant, and the cinnamon, just enough to nudge it towards something deeper, something that lingered at the back of the tongue. It wasn't just food, it was quiet and safety and dignity on a plate. It was something made with intention, even if the ingredients were humble. He watched me chew with a half smile, then patted my back once, like a father might. There's nothing wrong with being broke, he said. Just don't ever eat like you're poor. I've made that toast 100 different ways since then. Sometimes with honey, or a sprinkle of sea salt. Sometimes with rye bread, instead of sourdough, or almond butter when I feel fancy. But I always come back to Kofi's way. Pan-toasted bread, smooth peanut butter, soft banana, and a generous dusting of cinnamon from above, like falling leaves or old spice markets, remembered from stories. Now, when the day has been long and the silence of night settles in, I still make it, especially when the world feels a little too loud. I warm the skillet with patience, toast the bread until it speaks in whispers, and take my time with each layer. And as I sit down to eat, one bite at a time, slowly, gratefully, I remember that tired boy and the cook who taught him that nourishment is more than calories, it's care. So if your day has been heavy and your bones feel folded in on themselves, maybe this is the dish to turn to. You don't need much. A couple slices of bread, a banana, ripe but not gone, a spoonful of peanut butter, a dusting of cinnamon, and maybe a pan. If you want to do it right, make it quietly, eat it slowly, and feel it settle you. Like a hand on your back, you are safe, you are fed, and soon you'll be asleep. That was recipe 2. Recipe 6. Simple yogurt parfait with granola and strawberries. I once stayed at a vineyard guest house, nestled in the hills of the Loire Valley. It was the kind of place where the shutters creaked open to morning light and the gravel path crunched gently underfoot. I had been traveling for a week, tired from kitchens, markets, and too many trains, and that night I slept under a faded quilt with the window open just enough to hear the breeze through the vines. In the morning, breakfast wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be. No eggs, no bread basket, no steamer of hot milk, just a parfait and bird song. The owner, an older woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a cotton apron tied twice around her waist, brought it to me in a small glass bowl. She placed it gently on the table, her hands as careful as if she were handling blown glass, and said, "Beauty is layers, and food is no different." I remember looking down at it, white, gold, and red. Yogurt at the base, thick and creamy, a line of honey trailing along the side like sunlight. Strawberries, sliced just thin enough to catch the morning light, and a generous handful of granola tucked over the top like a blanket. Nothing more, but everything I needed. It started with the yogurt. She made her own, of course. Let it sit overnight in a warm oven, wrapped in a towel. The milk was whole, local, poured from glass bottles, with little paper caps. She told me yogurt needs time and warmth, like bread or people. It doesn't like being rushed. So even now, when I make this dish at home, I don't buy the fat-free kind. I look for something with body, something that still has that gentle tang, that creaminess, that coats the spoon just slightly. Greek yogurt works well plain, not sweetened, so the other ingredients can do the talking. Then the strawberries. She sliced them fresh, not too thin, not too thick, just enough to show the pale inner rings. If they weren't in season, she used stewed rhubarb or roasted plums. But that morning, the strawberries had been picked at dawn, and they tasted like fields warmed by sun. I learned later that she tossed them with a whisper of lemon juice and let them sit for a few minutes, a trick that brightens the flavor without shouting it. Now the granola. Hers was rustic, clumpy and golden, baked in big trays each week. Oats, almonds, sunflower seeds, a bit of olive oil, and maple syrup. She told me the secret was baking it low and slow, stirring it only once, so it could form clusters. She called them morning jewels. I once tried to replicate it with a store-bought bag, and it just wasn't the same. But when I have time, I make my own. I toast it on parchment paper, watching the color deepen and the smell of cinnamon and honey fill the kitchen. It's one of those quiet rituals that makes a house feel more like home. And the honey, not drizzled, but folded in between the layers. She would dip a spoon into a small clay jar, dark floral honey, from the hives behind the vineyard. Just a teaspoon or two, enough to blur the edges of the yogurt's tang and kiss the strawberries with warmth. When I make it now, I use wildflower honey or clover, depending on the season. I don't overdo it. It's a soft sweetness, not a shout. The assembly was never rushed. She'd spoon yogurt into the bottom of the glass, with the same grace someone might use to pour tea. Then a scatter of strawberries, then a small spoonful of honey, a gentle layer of granola. Then she'd repeat it, yogurt, fruit, granola, until the glass was full, ending with a few small berries perched on top like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. I remember eating it slowly, seated at a wooden table, with chipped paint, the morning sun just beginning to light up the dew on the vines outside. She didn't speak much during breakfast, only came by once to ask if I'd slept well. I nodded, mouth full, and she smiled like she already knew. Even now, years later, when I make this parfait, I think of that morning, of simplicity layered with intention, of how something so small, yogurt, fruit, granola, can feel like care when it's made gently, served slowly, and eaten without distraction. It's a good thing for nighttime too. Not just for breakfast. Sometimes when the day has been too full and the hours feel too heavy, I'll make one of these just before bed. I don't rush it. I build it like the old guest house owner taught me, layer by layer. And by the time I've taken the last bite, the hum of the day has softened into something quieter, something more manageable. So tonight, if sleep feels a little far away, and you want something light yet soothing, something that feels like quiet elegance in a bowl, slice some strawberry, scoop a bit of yogurt, layer gently, add a touch of honey, a crunch of granola, and let each bite remind you that beauty is not in the grand, but in the gentle layers we build, one atop the other. And with that, may you rest easy. Let your thoughts settle, like granola sinking into cream, and drift off as softly as the bird song I heard that morning in the hills. That was recipe 6. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.